Well, I haven't heard anything from Rhonda. So
She's taking her mom to church today.
she normally sends me an email, but I didn't. Get one this time, so. Maybe she'll hear it on the video when she watches. Okay, we are in chapter 6 of Daniel. We're starting at verse 12 today. And previously we learned that those jealous of Daniel in the court, in the king's court, the top management of the government, they had conspired against him with a plan to oust him, get rid of him.
Chapter 12, you say?
6,
Chapter 6.
verse 12.
It's verse 12. Okay.
Say, Ron, would you please move the microphone a little closer to you?
Oh, okay.
I think that'd help.
Want it closer to me too?
Big comments.
Yeah, I got to hear what you say.
I'll speak louder when I have a comment.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Is that better, Larry?
He said, is that better?
Yeah.
The battery is running low.
Boy, we better speak quick.
We didn't have that.
So,
Looks like it's off now.
I'll get it.
I appreciate that. I didn't want to be over me.
we're solving some technical difficulties.
It's on and off.
There we go. So anyway, Daniel is, he's just recently been put in charge of everything.
Watch go with that one.
There he is. Good? Good?
Better.
Okay, good. Daniel's too much competition. He just outperforms these young punks and they want to get rid of him. They want to move him out of the way. And they tricked the king into forbidding anyone to show loyalty or submission to anybody other than the king. And they did this knowing that Daniel prays 3 times a day, and that knowing Daniel, he's not going to stop. He's going to keep doing it. So they basically laid a trap for him. So that's where we are as we start verse 12. Then they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. Did you not sign an injunction that any man who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be cast into the lion's den? The king replied, the statement is true, according to the law of Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. Then they answered and spoke before the king. Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction which you signed, but keeps making his petition 3 times a day. Well, the law of Medes and Persians was a well-established, known part of the law. It meant that it was final. Once the law was written and signed by the king, it was final. It couldn't be changed. Even the king couldn't take it back or nullify it. It was just the law. It was infallible. In fact, in modern legalese, if you look at our laws, you'll find crossouts. They don't erase previous law. They add the changes to it and leave the old stuff there with bars through it. So they don't get rid of it. They keep it even if they modify it. So it's kind of part of the basic law that you don't get rid of previous laws. And if you remember in Esther, she ran into this problem with the law of Medes and Persians. You can't change it, and the guy tricked the king into signing, a death warrant for Jews, not knowing his wife was a Jew. So that was a problem, and so what they did, they had to come up with a counter law for Salem and that kind of thing. And in the New Testament, we have an example of how important this is, because it goes back to God's law. In Matthew 5:17 and 18, it says, do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until all is accomplished. Some law is infallible, and that's God's law. We know King's law is not infallible, but kings are put in place by God, so therefore they have this standard of the law of Medes and Persians. So anyway, the king is stuck with his own law, and we'll see that he's not too happy with it. So we'll go on to verse 14. Then as soon as the king heard the statement, he was deeply distressed and set his mind on delivering Daniel. And even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, recognize, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or statute which the king establishes may be changed. King Darius is kind of distressed. And it, those words, deeply distressed. That's not something about, oh, yeah, he's got a problem over there. I mean, he's deeply distressed, like some people are with their relatives in Afghanistan. They're deeply distressed about what's going to happen. So this has made an impact on him.
My version of it says he was sore displeased with himself
Yeah.
because he had fallen for their trap.
Exactly.
I'm sure he was displeased with them too, but he was just disappointed in how he just didn't.
He's blaming himself for what is the trouble that he's in.
Well, he pretty well says it's his fault.
Yeah.
Bless his heart.
Well, except for the bad actors.
Yeah.
It's their conspiracy. The king was just a
Yeah, but he
what
should
do
have
they call
read
it?
them out.
A willful idiot.
He just fell victim to his own vanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So- Sorry.
And that's what I came up with 3 reasons why. One was because he found no fault in Daniel. He didn't think Daniel praying 3 times a day was a problem. He didn't have a problem with that. Daniel, that was one of the reasons why he liked Daniel. He could trust him because he was godly man. He was about men. That's why he was important to the king. So that was one reason. He didn't find any fault in what Daniel was doing. And he developed a trust in Daniel. And he was a new king in a new kingdom that was huge. And he didn't want to have to deal with all the details every day. So he wanted Daniel there to take off that load so that he could go play golf or whatever they did in this case. And then the third thing is he was irritated because he was tricked. I mean, he got bamboozled, and it was becoming pretty plain to everybody. Daniel and the guys who did it and the king that he got tricked. So anyway, he spent all day seeking to save Daniel. And we said something last week about him. Darius must not have been too bright because he didn't see this coming. Well, now he can't find a solution, can't figure out how to undo it. So again, he wasn't exactly the brightest guy in the kingdom. And all the bright guys were all against Daniel. So he was on his own.
Hey, Roy, you know what I think is kind of neat in here
Mhm.
is that the king is giving, kind of like when I was unsaved, I did know that there was a God in heaven and a God that had authority and power. And even though I didn't want to follow him and worship him myself, I would acknowledge that truth. And it's kind of neat that we see the king acknowledging this God. It wasn't just about Daniel, although I think you're right, the character of Daniel was there, but it was also, but you've got Daniel, but then you've got his God. And he even says many things about the power of his God and the protection of his God. He has an acknowledgement for God. I think that's kind of neat.
Exactly. And that was in the next verses, we hit that nail on the head. Verse 16. Let me turn this air conditioner off for a second. So I don't hear that wind noise in the background.
Boy, he's high tech, turning it off with his phone. Brendan, they're turning it off with their phone.
I can barely answer my phone, much less.
We're talking about his units, man. You know he's talking about his grenade?
No,
Are you?
are you talking about turning the
He's
fan
talking
on?
about.
Oh,
the fake-
really?
Yeah, the fake.
That is cool. He is not there.
From home, I could adjust y'all's heater next week.
On Saturday night.
Wow.
Artificial intelligence.
So there's it's a contradiction. If Darius wanted other people to help run the kingdom because there's too much to do, and then you say, I want everybody to send their petitions to God through me as God. That doesn't make any sense. That I need help running this place. Everybody send their prayers to me. So apparently the guy had a big old head.
Sound like us.
I really don't need anybody because I am the thing.
Next
Well,
best thing.
Sound like us.
And the conspirators
Know
used that against the king.
Right.
They knew, hey, king, you're so important.
Mhm.
You know, you should be the intermediary between every person and every God.
Yeah.
You should be, you should be the first hand. So anyway, it's, yeah, you're right. But he didn't say everybody had to come to him to pray to their God.
No, they said to pray to it because I know all and I hear all of your prayers.
Okay, so verse 16. Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. Where'd that faith come from? A stone was brought and laid over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed in regard to Daniel. Then the king went off to his palace, spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. Okay, so the king is showing this faith in this God that he doesn't actually worship or pray to or believe in. But his relationship with Daniel led him to see Daniel's relationship with God,
It's good.
which then gave him faith in this God that he doesn't even know yet, not personally, not of himself. And that, like I said last week, you won't find things as we studied the Bible that you can apply to your own life. Live a life where others see God through you and become believers in God because of the way you believe in God, so that you can transfer that faith to others.
You know what that shows is that you can give legitimacy to the true God and not be saved.
Mhm.
You can give a
Sure.
certain amount of credibility and legitimacy and acknowledgement, but not know him
Mhm.
on a personal level.
And we're seeing this repeated.
Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar, did the same thing.
Same thing.
Same thing. But now, I think the difference is this guy is saying it before he sees a miracle, before he has a dream interpreted. He's saying it just because of Daniel's example. So.
What a difference in influence on a good man, makes everybody else.
Makes it harder for them not to be good.
Yes, yes,
The power of our witness.
yes,
Never underestimate your impact
yes.
of your impact of your faith on others. And Daniel's life impacted everybody. Those that were jealous of him and conspired against him, and those that were fond of him, like the king. So in the Army, we used to say, whatever you do in uniform reflects on the Army.
Yes.
So don't do it in uniform. If you got to do something irreputable, at least take your uniform off so that it doesn't reflect on the rest of us.
Mhm.
As Christians, we don't get to take our uniform off.
That's right.
There isn't anything we can take off.
I prefer you not.
We have to be an example all the time. Okay, Darius sealed it with his signet ring, in the wax and make it official. And he had all these nobles to do it too. He didn't want any chance of anybody saying, no, you didn't, you cheated. you let Daniel off, you went in and got him out of there in the middle of the night and kept him safe and that kind of thing. He wanted everybody to have proof that he implemented and executed the law as it should be, as it was written, even though he didn't like it. And then he went to bed without supper or entertainment, no TV, no music. He just
Didn't
went.
even sleep.
Didn't even sleep,
Yeah.
didn't even sleep.
And then he was so worried he could not sleep, couldn't get to sleep.
I'm
The
reminded,
longest night.
I'm reminded of David staying up all night
Mhm,
pleading for his child,
mhm.
same kind of thing.
Yep. I tell you, I know, I've been there. Those Marines on Kabul haven't slept for 3 days at most, maybe an hour or two here or there, just when they just passed out because they couldn't maintain consciousness anymore, but they're not having any rest.
You know, this is a powerful witness too, if you've ever been in a position of authority or leadership or whatever, management, whatever it is. From the king's point of view, he kind of knew these other fellas were wishy-washy and played up to him, and he couldn't really trust them. And, you know, but Daniel, he said, you know, here's a man I can trust. Here's a guy that's valuable to me, and I'm doing him harm, but it means something to him personally. It's personal for this king because of Daniel and who Daniel was to him, the attractiveness of, you know, you're an authority. Who do you lean on? Who do you rely on? Who is your helper that's trustworthy?
Mhm.
You know, that's an important thing.
Yeah.
And when you lose that critical key person.
Yeah.
And you already know that all the rest of the staff, you have to pick the best of the worst
Exactly.
to replace Daniel with.
Kind of like today's, kind of like the presidency today.
That's what I was.
Ooh, he's got terrible.
But you know, all of us have authority of some sort.
Yes.
We don't think about it, but if you're the man of the home or whatever, a husband, he has authority. He has a helper, meet unto him, his wife, his most incredible resource.
Yes.
Or it could maybe not be a resource if it's a foolish woman.
Could be a liability.
Or reversed, Nabal the fool
Mm.
with Abigail. She said he's a foolish man.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And he's supposed to be the one that's supposed, you know, man, we need that kind of stuff. Pastors need men in the church that they know that no matter what, they can hang in there with them, you know? And then wives need husbands and husbands need wives and children need parents they can rely on. It's everywhere,
Mhm.
this relationship.
In every authoritative position.
Yeah.
We used to, leadership is earned. It's not granted. We used to say, if you turn around and look and nobody's following you, you're not the leader. It doesn't matter what your title or what your rank or how many years of experience you got. If nobody will follow you, then you're not a leader. You may be a colonel or a general, but you're not a leader if they won't follow you.
Mhm.
I gotta say one more thing. I gotta lift up our pastor. I love it every time he says, you say something to the effect to the congregation. The way you treat your wife that's how I see it. To me, that's what I can judge.
Yes.
You've said that many times.
Absolutely.
I think it's great.
Amen. Okay, verse 19. Then the king arose at dawn at the break of day and went in haste to the lion's den. When he had come near to the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Hey, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions?" I like the way that it doesn't say he awoke. It said he arose. He still hadn't been gone to sleep. He's still waiting for the sun to come up so he can go find out what happened to Daniel. Kind of like a kid on Christmas Eve. I can remember,
Oh, yeah.
well, we can't get up yet because it's not light outside. We have to lay here for another hour. The king was waiting for the sunrise so he could go find out what was going on. He clearly hoped that Daniel made it, but At this point, he's kind of indicating that his hope is stronger than his faith. And he doesn't have the faith to peacefully wait and sleep and get up, have breakfast, and then go down and get Daniel out of the pit. He doesn't know. He just doesn't know. But he hopes. He wants Daniel to be okay, but he doesn't know. His faith is not his faith. He doesn't have a faith in God. He recognizes Daniel's faith in God.
But he knows the Lord's living, though. You know, the Lord's probably been working on him that night too.
Yeah. And he's going to find out how
Yeah.
strong and powerful and mighty
Mhm.
this God is. Okay, 21. Then Daniel spoke to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him, and also towards you, O king, I have committed no crime." It's interesting the way he writes this. It's intentional, I'm sure, as everything in the Bible is. He says the angel sent by God to shut the mouths of the lion. But why? Why did God send the angel to shut the mouth of lions? And he says it specifically because Daniel was found innocent before God. And then of the accusations of being disloyal to the king. So God didn't save Daniel just because he didn't disrespect the king. It was because God was showing his judgment that Daniel was innocent. Now, this is Daniel. He hadn't been in a temple in 60 years, 70 years.
Right.
Hasn't followed the law prescribed by Moses for 70 years, but he's being declared innocent by an angel from God. You're living right. You're doing what you can do. You're still my servant, which is another lesson. You know, our relationship with God is our relationship with God. And it's up to us to keep that clean and in perspective and God in his right place. And you can do it anywhere. You can go to the war for a year and never get to go to church. It doesn't mean you can't have a good, strong, secure relationship with God. And Daniel did in this place where he was.
You know, it also kind of shows, especially if you combine it with what Paul said. Paul said that as a Pharisee, he was blameless. I mean, he went right through it. Circumcised the 8th day. Man, he kept all the law, all the ceremonial law to perfection. He kept it his whole life. And his heart was wrong with God. But then when he became saved, his heart was made right with God. And he understood the purposes of the ceremony. Like Daniel, his heart is great with God, even though he can't keep every ceremonial law.
Caiaphas.
Yeah.
He was a high priest. He was conforming to the law, but he had an evil heart. Okay, verse 23. Points, huh? Then the king was very pleased and gave orders for Daniel to be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him because he had trusted his God. His faith is verified. The miracle was performed by God, and now the king and the whole court, all the conspirators, they all see it. This plan had one little flaw: God. Otherwise, would have been home free. Would have got what we wanted. Now, there's something here. It's kind of a sticky point, hard to explain. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. God's protection was complete. He didn't have a scratch, not one bit of harm. Is this a guarantee? Is this a test of faith or a test of innocence? Well, why was Daniel saved? And
so many early Christians were thrown into the Dana line and they were torn to pieces.
Yes.
why Why are Christians being murdered today
Yes,
in Afghanistan? Because they refuse to deny God to the Muslims. You deny God or I'm going to kill you. And they don't deny God and they get killed. So why are some Christians saved and some Christians not saved? And my theory is that God's purpose and will is the point. God decides when to give mercy. And God knows better than we whether it is merciful. Sometimes it's better to go to heaven. It's a reward. to go to
right.
heaven.
Like,
Uh,
like Moses not being able to go into the promised land.
Mhm, mhm,
He went to the real promised land.
mhm.
So this story, this Daniel story in the lion's den is probably one of the most famous stories in the Bible. Most kids learn it by the time they're, 8 or 9 years old, hopefully even sooner than that. But so think of that. This is a story we still study, we still read, we still get information out of. So God's purpose was fulfilled to the king. It changed the king, the way he thinks. It meant something to the accusers. It fulfilled God's purpose for the world, for the history. So there's several reasons why God had to do this. They did it for the reasons that he did it. It's not up to us. So my point is when you see somebody not get delivered by God,
Right.
you can't impute from that, well, it's because they weren't faithful to God. They should have been better Christians. You can't.
or they sinned. They sinned.
They sinned themselves into that
Kind
situation.
of like this Job's friends.
Exactly. So we have to search our hearts and pray to God to find the meaning and truth in everything. Just because we view Daniel getting saved and someone else not, we can't say one way or the other that one was better than the other or not.
One thing that can shed, I think that's a very interesting subject you're touching on and very broad. There's a lot to that. But one thing that can shed a little bit of light, the New Testament says that miracles are for the unbelieving, not the believing.
Right.
It's for the unbelieving, not the believing.
Mhm.
And if you look at miracles throughout the whole Bible, you see a general pattern, where God in his great mercy looks upon man who is in unbelief. And sometimes he says, I'll prove it.
Yes.
I will prove it. And then other times we see people have to give up their lives. Hebrews 11 is all about people who died for their faith and things. But he's doing some things here through Daniel, through Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, through the king, high profile people. But this whole nation was seeing this stuff and hearing about this stuff. And who is this God that delivers? I'm sure. And all the Jews were there probably talking about it. So this was a tremendous, I think, act of mercy from God to even the Babylonian people.
Mhm.
All eyes were on it.
I think you see that when Paul was imprisoned and the guard, there were evidently lots of those guards saved.
Yeah.
And they were chained to him probably 24 hours a day,
Mhm.
different whatever, how many hours. That was God's mercy.
Mhm.
He had a plan of even using Paul's imprisonment to further the gospel.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't think hard things are furthering the gospel.
Especially we're in
Because we're
them.
thinking about it. Yeah, that's right. And-
Well,
But I think that all the time when I used to think, how can that Afghanistan, that's what's fresh in my mind now. And I was, how can this, God has a plan for that?
Yeah.
And it just seems so
Kind of like
bad.
Hector.
Yeah.
Our Russian friend that got murdered.
Yeah.
Kind of wakes people up.
just as you were saying, Mike, I can only imagine Daniel getting locked into that den and the rock covering it up. And he's sitting there looking at the lions. I would think he would be like Stephen. He doesn't care. Go ahead.
Fact was, did it show in here that he went to sleep? Was it in there?
Daniel?
Yeah, they did.
I don't.
Yeah, I think he slept and
Yeah,
the
he
king
slept.
didn't.
Yeah, well, that shows how much he was worried.
I don't know if I'm right, but I think he did sleep in there, didn't he?
I don't
In the
know.
You
dining.
know
Well,
what
that's-
lion
Am I
does?
wrong?
is He senses fear and he probably didn't sense no fear and
Am I wrong on that? Did
I
he
don't-
sleep in there or
I
not?
don't see it in
I
this
may
passage.
getting mixed
It
up,
doesn't
but
say it
James,
here.
what was, he
Huh?
fixed, or John,
Doesn't say it
John
here.
the Baptist, he
It doesn't
didn't
say.
get beheaded,
Yeah.
and he was asleep. Boy, he could care less.
Yeah. Like Jesus in the bottom of the boat.
Yeah.
Probably wrong on that one.
My point is exactly that. Daniel was worried,
Mhm.
and it didn't even matter. Daniel wasn't worried because he didn't care one way or the other. If you let me go ahead with tonight, that's fine. If you want to keep me here, that's fine. Like Dennis said something like that last Wednesday night. He said, if you're at peace with God, you're not worried about dying. You don't necessarily want to.
Well, we understand our days are numbered.
Yeah.
And there is that day appointed to die,
Yeah.
and God orchestrates that.
And the reward's there. So it's not something to be worried about. It's something that's just not fulfilled yet. Okay. Now, to verse 24, the king then gave orders, and they brought those men who had maliciously accused Daniel, and they cast them, their children,
Mm.
and their wives into the lion's den.
Reckoning day.
And they had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. They didn't even get the rock rolled back in front of the door before they had all perished. Now, I can see the appropriateness of those conspirators dying, but
Maybe their family.
the children and wives, but that wasn't God's decision. God didn't order that or even recommend it. It was the ungodly king that ordered that.
That our decisions so many times it affects our family too.
That's everyone.
Affects everyone.
In fact, you almost can't keep our decisions from affecting,
That's
Mhm.
right.
good or bad. So they're gone. They're not going to pull any more shenanigans.
in some way it was an act of mercy to the children at least, because they would have gone to heaven. If not, they were growing up in a pagan society and eventually gone to hell.
Mhm.
The Lord has a sense of humor sometimes. Who was that in Esther? What was the guy's name that accused Haman?
Yeah.
He was hanged on his own apparatus.
Mhm.
Okay, then Darius the king wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language who were living in all the land, may your peace abound. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and enduring forever, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever. He delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. Now, that's a pretty strong endorsement. It's a pretty strong message. So why was Daniel saved? Well, one, so that everybody in all the nations and all the people will hear how powerful and how this God should be placed above all other gods. So how do you get an idolatrous world to recognize and hear of God's power and authority? One way is for the king to issue it as a declaration because of the miracle that was performed. So now, verse 28, so this Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So now Daniel again is elevated to the highest levels of government in an idolatrous kingdom where he can implement and affect the operation of this kingdom with God's guidance. God puts people where he wants them so that they can have an influence, impact that he wants them to have. And even Darius was put there by God. Daniel was put there by God. This is not just a story out of the Bible. This shows how God works. God does what he chooses, how he chooses, when he chooses. And our job is to try to understand it and gain from it.
Can't keep a good man down.
No. Okay, it's time to stop. I was going to, and I think I'll start this next week. If y'all want to read ahead. Jeremiah 24, 1 through 10. Found it.
I found it. Jeremiah 24, 1 through 10.
Start out with after Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon.
Yeah.
That we're going to spend a few minutes on that because that ties directly back into what we're doing in Daniel. And we'll talk for a few minutes because I see a real close parallel between what Jeremiah says about Babylon and what's happening in Afghanistan today. We'll spend a few minutes on that next week. So I guess this is it for today.
Okay,
All right.
great week. Hi, bye.
Boy, good to see you.